Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. The Exploring the Feasibility of Offshore Wind Energy for the California North Coast webinar, hosted by the Schatz Energy Research Center at Humboldt State University, will begin in just a few moments. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please email windstudies@schatzcenter.org or send a message in the chat within Zoom, and we'll be more than happy to help you fix those technical issues. Just to say out loud, we've muted all of the lines to minimize background noise, so thank you, and hello, on mute. And we also encourage you to complete the poll that will be shown on your screen so we can get to know who's joining us for today's webinar. So thank you, and stay tuned. Welcome, folks. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We will get started in just a few minutes. If you're having any technical difficulties, please email windstudies@schatzcenter.org or send a message via the chat, and we will be happy to help you out. Okay, everyone. Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the Exploring the Feasibility of Offshore Wind Energy for the California North Coast. This webinar is hosted by the Schatz Energy Research Center at Humboldt State University, and we will begin now. Again, if you have any technical difficulties, please email windstudies@schatzcenter.org or send a message via the chat. We've also muted the lines in an effort to minimize any background noise, and we would welcome your participation in the poll that's shown on your screen so we can get to know who is joining us for today's webinar. My name is Sarah Shen, and I am here on behalf of Strategic Earth Consulting, and it is my excitement to join you for today's discussion, which is the final webinar in a series of 5 on the topic of offshore wind energy for the California North Coast. Strategic Earth has been contracted by the Schatz Center to help design and facilitate this webinar series. And as neutral facilitators, we're committed to upholding an inclusive, transparent, and productive dialogue today. So if you have any questions or concerns about how we're supporting this webinar or any other webinars, the previous webinars, please feel free to contact us directly at hello@strategicearth.com. And we'll be dropping both of those links into the chat momentarily. So the purpose of this webinar series has been to share the findings from the research completed by the Schatz Center and their partners over the past 18 months to explore the feasibility of offshore wind energy development for the North Coast of California. Each webinar has been focused on a theme of that research and has provided a very high-level overview of the key findings. Taken together, this 5-part webinar series has provided the community with information about energy generation and transmission, local economic and job development, port and coastal infrastructure, ecological and geological environmental considerations, and a snapshot of community perspectives on regional impacts and opportunities. And very importantly, these webinars have provided an opportunity for the Schatz Center to engage with all of you, the North Coast community and others interested in renewable energy, and to have an opportunity to learn of your questions, concerns, and information needs. Webinar materials, including today's agenda, as well as 20 research reports that are documenting the offshore wind feasibility research, are available at the Schatz Center website, and the link is shown. We encourage you to visit the Schatz Center website and download these reports if you're looking for more information about the findings that were presented throughout the webinar series. As I've said before, the purpose of the webinar has been to give a high-level overview, so we encourage you to do your own research and visit the website to read those reports. This webinar is also being recorded and closed captioned in an effort to increase accessibility and accommodate conflicting schedules. So I invite you to click on the CC on the bottom of your screen to enable the closed captions, or you can visit the URL that will drop into the chat to view the captions directly. All participants are muted and will remain on mute throughout the webinar to eliminate background noise. So thank you for your understanding. And although you're all muted, we very much would love to hear from you, just in a more virtual form. So we do invite you to share not only your questions, but also your insights, priorities, concerns, just your thoughts. And we invite you to do so by sending us a message or a question in the Q&A box within Zoom, or by emailing winstudies@schatzcenter.org. And just given the large number of participants, logistically, we are unable to open the lines and hear your voices directly. So we're doing our best with the technology that we have. As we've done previously in this webinar series, as the questions and comments come in, we will consider and select a mix of questions and statements that reflect the diversity of the folks that we have on the line and consider both the local and non-local voices. And we will continue to proceed reading out the questions and having our panelists and our speakers address as many of those questions as possible while remaining within our allocated time frame. To increase transparency, and because it's very unlikely that we'll get through all of the questions and comments that are submitted, the Schatz Center will be providing a document that lists out the questions and comments that were submitted during the webinar. And this document will be posted on the Schatz Center website and made available to the public. And it's important to just say out loud that questions and comments within that document will be anonymous. So we will strip your name and your identifying information unless you specifically choose to include your name or your affiliation alongside your question or comment. And if you do choose to provide this information with your statement, then you are giving consent for it to be shared publicly. The Schatz Center is also working on a webpage that will provide answers to frequently asked questions about offshore wind on the California North Coast. And so this page is expected to launch in November and will continue to be updated over time. All questions received, including those that we don't have time to address during the webinar, will be considered during the development of this webpage. Okay. So if you're joining us today, then you probably understand what the goals of the webinar are, as those are included in the agenda. But just so that we're all setting the same foundation, the goal of today's webinar is really fourfold. So first, to review the key findings of research completed by the Schatz Energy Research Center and their collaborators during 2019 and 2020, and discuss next steps in the Schatz Center feasibility studies. To share next steps for state and federal agencies in relation to offshore wind feasibility analyses and/or development on California's North Coast. To reflect on the community perspectives that we've heard from panelists and participants throughout the webinar series, as well as through the webinar experience surveys, and to provide an additional opportunity to learn of insights through the Q&A and the participant comments today. And lastly, to help ensure that all of you have the resources and the communication channels that are necessary to stay informed and engaged about discussions of regional offshore wind development. So again, being mindful of the large number of folks that we do have on the phone today, we will move forward with the understanding that everyone is willing to abide by the meeting agreements currently shown on your screen. So thank you in advance. Okay, so thanks for your patience as I walked us through some of the webinar goals and housekeeping items. I understand this information may be repeat if you've been joining us each week. But to ensure everyone has the same understanding of intentions and approach, it's important that we just took a few minutes to go over that information. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Jared Huffman, US Congressman for California's 2nd District. Congressman Huffman, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. And if you don't have your video on yet, invite you to turn that on. Perfect. Mr. Huffman is unable to stay for the remainder of the webinar. So after his opening remarks, we'll pause for just a few minutes to see if there are any questions or comments that have come in from the participants, and we will direct those to Congressman Huffman. And so, as I've said, welcome folks to submit questions or comments via Q&A or email. Okay, so enough from me. Would love to turn it over to you. And welcome again, Congressman. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Sarah. And thanks, Arnie. Thanks to the Schatz Energy Research Center for hosting this series of webinars on local offshore wind energy generation. I want to thank also everyone who has supported and participated in this research and community engagement effort. As I think everyone knows, the North Coast has some of the best wind resources in the nation. A potential offshore wind project in this area, we have learned, could provide clean renewable energy for our local community, but it could also create jobs and other economic benefits while helping our state and our nation hit greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. So there are lots of reasons to try to make this happen if we can, but that doesn't mean you don't have to be thoughtful and do it right. We know any proposed project on the North Coast needs to meet robust standards to prevent negative impacts for marine mammals, birds, habitat, and of course our local fishing community. We need to ensure that local tribes, fishermen, and other community members continue to be engaged in the development process. And if we do that, I think this can be a win-win all around. That at least is my hope for this. As we move forward along the development process, understanding the details of the project obviously is very important. The size and the scope of a proposed project, other details like specific technologies that are used, transmission methods, for example, all of this will produce different types of impacts on local infrastructure, our environment, and our communities. Very important, I believe, that both the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and the developers themselves adequately address and mitigate concerns that are raised through the public process, and that we make sure there are ample community benefits for the North Coast. And this research that's being conducted by the folks at Schatz is a very important step in ensuring that we stay engaged in this process as a community to make sure we get it right. As the chair of the Natural Resources Subcommittee on Water, Oceans, and Wildlife, and also as a member of the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, I have been and I will remain committed to finding and supporting solutions to the localized impacts of climate change. I know I don't have to tell any of you that oil and gas development off our coast is not the future. It's also not the future for our energy needs. I am committed to making sure that fossil fuels stay in the ground. And I've authored and co-sponsored legislation that prohibits disastrous offshore oil and gas development and also seeks to increase accountability when these projects produce environmental and community damage. I have consistently supported legislation that would increase research and development in support of renewable energy projects, both onshore and offshore. And I believe that undoubtedly, beyond dispute, this is the kind of thing we need to be pursuing. Most recently, I, along with my colleagues in the Select Committee for the Climate Crisis, released policy recommendations, a climate action plan that support the research and development of offshore wind energy as one of the solutions we must pursue in response to the climate crisis. Our committee recommends more funding for the Department of Energy for research and grants, tax credits for offshore renewable projects, and loan guarantees in support of public-private partnerships to address grid constraints. The report also emphasizes the need for these projects to preserve the integrity of the coastline and the environment and to support coastal communities that are involved. I'm going to do everything that I can to ensure that any project on the North Coast undergoes significant environmental review, that it includes a robust mitigation plan, extensive community engagement, and that it addresses issues posed by our tribes and our community members. It must also include an open and transparent development process. As we move into a new Congress and hopefully a new administration come November, I will continue to author and support legislation that emphasizes these responsible development considerations while also recognizing the urgency of this moment that we're in so that we can quickly and safely decarbonize our nation's energy. So thank you again for joining the conversation the past couple of weeks through these webinars, and thanks to the Schatz Energy Research Center for continuing a very, very important dialogue here. I am with you as we move forward in this process. So please don't hesitate to reach out to my Eureka District office. I'm happy to support wherever I can. Good luck and enjoy the rest of the program.
Thank you so much, Congressman. So we do have one question that's come in for you, and we'll pause to see if others come in. So this is a question from Michael Winkler. He asks, if Democrats win majorities in the House and Senate and win the presidency, what changes do you expect in federal policy for renewable energy in general and wind energy in particular?
Well, hi, Michael. Thanks for the question. So in that scenario, I think you're going to see dramatic changes. For the past 4 years, you've seen all of the levers of government pulling for fossil fuel development just about everywhere off our shores. That's been reeled back in for some political reasons, but our public lands, it has just been a huge rush to develop oil and gas and to become a major exporter of fossil fuels and to try to revive this dying coal industry. You're going to see a dramatic transformation where these efforts to prop up fossil fuels are replaced by a new effort to push clean, safe, renewable energy. And offshore wind is certainly a huge part of that. So I just think it's going to be a fundamentally, almost an opposite type of policy when it comes to the type of energy we develop and also how we do it. We're going to do it in a way that respects and honors our environmental laws and isn't constantly trying to undermine them.
Perfect, thank you. We will just pause for another minute and allow folks to submit questions and comments through the Q&A within Zoom. Hopefully you've located that by now, or email windstudies@schatzcenter.org. We'll just pause for another moment or so. Okay, just checking in with my backstage team. I don't think any other questions have come in. So we'll let folks noodle on that information over the course of the webinar. And thanks again for being here. We really appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Okay, so now I would love to pass the mic to Dr. Arnie Jacobson, Director of the Schatz Center, for further welcoming remarks and also an orientation presentation. So Arnie will provide his reflections on the Schatz Center research findings to date and on the webinar series discussions with the panelists, the presenters, and all of our participants. And he will also outline the current and upcoming offshore wind studies that are being conducted by the Schatz Center and share more information about reports and analyses. Arnie, as you get started, would love you to also help us understand who's joined us for today's webinar based on the polls.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Congressman Huffman. In terms of those who have joined, it looks like we have just over 90 attendees so far, and about half are from here on the North Coast, maybe 30% from California outside of the North Coast, and another 20% from other parts of the United States, and one international participant. And so welcome to you all. It's really a pleasure to have everyone. In terms of the groups that best describe, or the group affiliations that best describe the audience, it sounds like the energy industry, which could include offshore wind developers or associated consultants, and perhaps energy utilities, includes about 1/3 of the audience. Government agencies, local, state, federal, about 28% of the audience. And North Coast residents are also a significant category, and it looks like 12% identify as being associated with environmental groups and 11% associated with research or university organizations. So that gives a sense of who is on the line here today. And a big thank you and welcome to everyone for joining. Let me just pause to share my screen. And as Sarah had mentioned, I'll provide an introductory presentation, which will actually serve as a synthesis of some of the work that has been presented over the course of the series. I won't try and go over everything because there's quite a bit of material, but instead we'll focus on providing a summary of the state of knowledge associated with each of the various areas, basically what we know and don't know so far. I'll intersperse with that some quotes from panelists and other participants in the webinar series so far in order to bring voices into the conversation from others that we've heard over the course of the series. And we'll additionally spend just a few minutes talking about some of the next step efforts that we're engaged with here at the Schatz Center in terms of upcoming research. And so without further ado, I'll proceed. As I've said, and most of you have heard, we've been engaged in this research for the past 18 months. We've been studying various aspects of the feasibility of offshore wind, and that work has been carried out with funding from state and federal agencies, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, the California Ocean Protection Council, and the Governor's Office of Planning and Research have provided the primary support for this work. In addition, one of our major partners, Pacific Gas and Electric, self-funded analysis related to transmission and interconnection issues, and we're grateful for all of that support. I also want to give a big thank you to all of our team members from the Schatz Center and more broadly at Humboldt State University, as well as our major partners in this work, PG&E, Mott McDonald, H.D. Harvey and Associates, and the Navy Region Southwest. So a big thank you. This has very much been a broad team effort to move all of this work forward. As I've also discussed previously, our work cut across a lot of different areas. This is very much an interdisciplinary effort. And we've been able to cover much of that work, but not necessarily in full detail in the context of this webinar series. For a more detailed look at of that work, our reports are available on the Schatz Center website. 20 of the 23 reports are currently available for download, and the others should become available quite soon, in the coming weeks in most cases. And of course, the webinar series is available via recordings. The 4 sessions that have took place previously are currently available, and this one will become available as soon as we're able to get it up. So certainly by the end of this month, it will be available. So all of these become a resource for sharing out information about the potential for offshore wind here on the North Coast, as well as pros and cons and a variety of perspectives that relate to that. And our goal in doing all of this work really has been, in addition to, of course, informing the agencies that funded us, the public here on the North Coast and other interested stakeholders, has been really to provide information to all of you and to help enable thinking about or understandings about what this could look like. A quote from Mike Wilson, Humboldt County 3rd District Supervisor, from the 4th webinar in this series, I think is aligned with our approach. In that webinar, Mike Wilson said, if you're going to have a transition in terms of energy in the way we develop our society, it has to be a just transition. And that transition, the first step, has to be information and really making sure that everyone has an equitable access to the information. And I think this webinar series is a good start. And that really is in keeping with what we were intending for this series. At this stage in the process, we do know a fair amount about factors that influence offshore wind feasibility and offshore wind potential. But there are many areas where additional data and analysis are needed. A lot of the work that we've done to date has been focused on existing data. It often included new analysis, but drawing from literature and existing data sets. And as we move forward, we really need to be moving into a period where new original data are being collected in key areas, such as issues related to environmental impact or geologic hazards or the wind resource itself, et cetera. There's a need for refining and collecting new data that's very specific to the possibility of offshore wind development on the North Coast. So that's another way of saying is we've gotten very far with existing data, and it's now time to move on to that next step. In terms of the status of knowledge in various areas, I'll start with the wind resource itself. If there's a statement that the North Coast offshore wind resource is world-class, we're confident that the resource is enormous in terms of our knowledge status, but there are many ways that this analysis can be refined and should be refined. In that vein, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory recently updated their offshore wind, their wind speed resource model. And our original analysis here was based on NREL's original wind toolkit simulated wind speed data. And now that they've updated this model, that can be used to update our analysis as well. And we are at an early stage in doing that. And so as that proceeds, we'll have a refined assessment of the wind resource and the energy generation that could come from that. In addition, earlier this month, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, with support from the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, deployed a buoy in the Humboldt Call area that will provide detailed information about the wind resource, as well as collecting a number of other data that's relevant. And so this will give us the ability to essentially ground truth the simulated or the modeled wind speed data, and so that'll also be a very useful resource as we move forward as it relates to the wind resource. So many thanks to NREL, PNNL, and BOEM, and others who are involved in those efforts. A quote from Jana Gagnon of the Blue Lake Rancheria tribe in relationship to the wind resource. In the fourth webinar, Jana Gagnon said, "I have heard comments such as that there are lots of places where we can put wind projects. I want to firmly correct this. World-class wind sites are rare. The one off of the Humboldt County coast can provide highly efficient wind power at times of the day and days of the year when we need it to complement solar power and other forms of clean energy." Moving from the wind resource itself to energy generation from that wind resource, if the statement is North Coast offshore wind can contribute substantially to California's climate and clean energy goals, we are confident that the resource would provide substantial renewable energy generation. The accuracy of the energy generation estimates are linked to the quality of the wind data. And so as the wind data are updated, we'll also be updating the energy generation estimates. But either way, we are confident that that North Coast offshore wind can contribute substantial amounts of renewable energy and support California's climate and clean energy goals. We also have a high degree of confidence that offshore wind is a low carbon energy source when you consider that on a life cycle basis, and that is drawing from existing literature and research related to this carried out by others. In terms of resources in our publication series, report number 2 and report number 3 from our offshore wind series are related to the topics discussed here on the screen. And also webinar 1 had a strong focus on this, and there was also, in relationship to the offshore wind being a low carbon energy source, there was a brief discussion of that in webinar number 2. So if people are interested in following up, those are some reports and webinars that you might check out. Moving on to economic viability and economic development. The economic viability of offshore wind is connected to wind farm scale, if that is the statement. We're confident that economic viability improves with larger scale projects due to economies of scale. We also know that economic viability involves challenges for offshore wind, even for the larger projects, in part due to here on the North Coast, due to the high cost of transmission. But in any case, the costs are expected to decline over time. And so I think this is an area where continued attention and continued analysis will be quite important. But I think that there is some optimism that over time, offshore wind here on the North Coast will become economically competitive for the right projects at the right scale. If the statement is offshore wind could create jobs and support economic development in the region, we're confident that significant job creation could occur. Our analysis ended up being a statewide analysis because there weren't data available to conduct a region-specific analysis. And so on the basis of our analysis, we're able to indicate that estimated numbers of jobs, both initially and over the long term, that would be created statewide, but we're confident that a significant number of those jobs could be here in the region. In terms of resources, reports number 6, 7, 9, and 10, and webinar number 1 touch on these topics, and so therefore can be places to go for additional information. And a few perspectives that relate to this. In the first webinar in the series, Nessie Sumate indicated we're seeing all of the demand for offshore wind energy continue to grow. Technology advances, falling cost, and tremendous economic potential make offshore wind a promising avenue for diversifying and balancing California's energy portfolio. And in the fourth webinar, Jeff Hunterlach, a district union representative from Operating Engineers Local Number 3, said that if offshore wind were to take off, it will require skilled labor. Long-term, these types of projects could create sustainable jobs. We would like to see the work done in an environmental and safe manner. Moving on to another topic, which is the relationship between offshore wind on the North Coast and the US military mission. A representative of the US Department of Defense, after reviewing some materials associated with our study, indicated that DoD regional offshore the DoD regional offshore team continues to find that offshore wind development within the Humboldt Call area can be compatible with DoD's mission. And so we don't see concerns about the compatibility with the US military mission being a significant barrier to development of offshore wind here on the North Coast, based on that information. Report number 23 in our series relate to this topic, and we also discussed it briefly in webinar 1 in the series. Moving to transmission, we are confident that we've identified transmission as a major barrier for the development of offshore wind. And we spent a fair amount of time looking into this issue. However, there is some uncertainty about the cost for both smaller and larger scale offshore wind development options. The costs that we identified or estimated together with partners indicated fairly high costs. But we think that there may be opportunities, especially at the smaller scale of development, to find ways of reducing that. And so to explore that, we're in the process of moving forward on a follow-on analysis that's supported by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and involves a partnership with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, Quanta Technology, and Pacific Gas and Electric. And that would be a study to explore possibilities to reduce the cost of transmission for small to medium commercial scale projects. So that is one of the key follow-on activities that we're engaged in, and I think is a promising area for potentially finding ways of seeking to reduce the associated costs. Reports for the work that we've completed to date that relate to transmission and interconnection include reports number 4, 5, 8, and 12 in our series. And we also talked about this in some detail in webinar 1 of the series. And a related quote from Karen Douglas, who's a California Energy Commissioner. In the first webinar, she noted that, or stated that we appreciate we have work to do in California in terms of questions about how we can overcome obstacles that we see both on the North Coast and on the Central Coast to find the potential or to realize the potential of offshore wind. At the same time, the Senate Bill 100 process and the energy work that the state agencies are doing right now are also a really important point to help us understand the options and choices and trade-offs confronting us as we move to meet our goals. And so I think this is really an acknowledgement that there is a fair amount of work to do in terms of understanding what is possible and identifying and addressing challenges, including challenges associated with transmission. Moving on to the Humboldt Bay and the port, the analysis that was conducted in the context of this might lead to a statement that Humboldt Bay can provide a staging ground for assembly, deployment, and maintenance of floating offshore wind systems. The analysis indicated that the port has good potential to support offshore wind, but a fair amount of investment is needed in order to upgrade the port, as well as aspects of the navigation channel and other parts of the coastal infrastructure. If that were to proceed, of course, environmental impact, cultural resources, residents' concerns, and permitting would need to be considered and addressed. And even with those upgrades, there would be limits to the size of the offshore wind systems that could be deployed and the seasonality of the deployment. To overcome those limits would require very substantial changes to the port infrastructure and to the navigation channel, and those were beyond what were contemplated in the context of our analysis. In terms of reports that relate to that part of the work, number 11, 18, and 19, as well as webinar 3, include information about that. And we're expecting to release report 19 moderately soon, probably within the next month. In terms of some perspectives in relationship to this, in the third webinar, Larry Otker, who is with the Humboldt Bay Harbor and Recreation District, said, our objective is to be the West Coast hub for renewable energy, to be the assembly, fabrication, substructure, anchoring, manufacturing, to basically start the development of offshore wind in Humboldt Bay, and then also supply the wind turbines for other areas. Coming from a different perspective, in the fourth webinar, Jennifer Savage, who is with the Surfrider Foundation and is also a resident of the Humboldt Bay Peninsula, asked, how would all of this affect Peninsula residents who have already long experienced the negative impacts of industry, but have thus far lacked any of the benefits such as robust community services or political influence? And also, perhaps in relationship to this question, Jana Gagnon of the Blue Lake Rancheria tribe in the 4th webinar said, we will be expecting certain industry investments in the region, which are a part of community benefits models that are now typical of these large industrial buildouts. We also know that infrastructure and operations related to North Coast offshore wind development would cut across the ancestral territories of multiple Native American tribes. When you consider the offshore portions, things that might happen here onshore and the transmission lines. And for the portions that occur in and around Humboldt Bay, these would take place in the ancestral territory of the Wiyot people. In relationship to this, I'll share a quote from Adam Cantor of the Natural Resources Department of the Wiyot tribe. In the 3rd webinar, Adam Cantor said, the Wiyot tribe has long supported renewable energy development that is well cited, and we are open-minded and excited about the potential for offshore wind on the North Coast, especially the community-based approach and stakeholder involvement that this group of partners is taking early on during the planning process. We hope that with early engagement with the tribe and other stakeholders, that such a project could avoid and mitigate any negative impacts. And we're excited to take a deeper look at some of the biological survey work and to digest more literature on all of these subjects. In relationship to environmental impacts, and thinking especially about local environmental impacts, if the statement is onshore and offshore environmental impacts associated with offshore wind development must be considered and addressed, I think we clearly know that this is true, that it's important to pay attention both to the onshore and offshore aspects of these impacts. In terms of specifics, much is known about the ecology of the region, but there are uncertainties regarding environmental impacts, especially for seabirds and marine mammals. And the analysis that's taken place so far has been based on existing available data. There's a need for additional primary data collection in this area, and extensive monitoring would be needed if an offshore wind project were to move forward. The analysis has been conducted so far also indicates that for the types of environmental impacts that are expected or could be expected, mitigation opportunities are expected to be available. And a few reports or resources in relationship to this, reports number 13 and 14 and webinar 2 provide detailed information in relationship to these topics. A few quotes. Laurie Richmond, who is part of our research team and is on the faculty of the Environmental Science and Management Department here at Humboldt State University, indicated that the top concerns that were expressed in the 41 interviews that we conducted related to environmental impacts. And that's basically saying that in a series of interviews that were conducted with stakeholders, environmental impacts were frequently mentioned across a whole wide range of stakeholders, indicating that this is one of the areas that is of strong interest here in our region. And Tom Wheeler of the Environmental Protection Information Center, or EPIC, said in the second webinar in the series, we are honestly still in the early stages of wind energy development, both onshore and especially here offshore. So we're going to learn a lot in the next couple of years about risks, impacts, and ways to reduce those impacts. So ensuring that adaptive management is part of the project and that we have well-defined thresholds of when we need to include an additional mitigation measure is going to be important. I think that that would help to reduce some of the concerns from some of the environmental community that is particularly concerned about impacts on biodiversity. I think that inclusion of those adaptive management measures is going to go a long ways. In relationship to this topic, one of the follow-on projects that we are engaged with jointly with H.D. Harvey and Associates and with funding support from the California Energy Commission under their EPIC program is related to the interaction between seabirds and offshore wind projects on the California coast. The project is might be called the Seabird 3D Distribution and Relative Risk from California Offshore Wind. It will involve development of a three-dimensional seabird distribution model for the California current, and that includes not just the North Coast, but all up and down the California coast. Evaluating the relative risk of offshore wind impacts to seabirds for different locations and turbine heights, and compare trade-offs between seabird risk and power generation. And so this work is work that we expect to move, or that we're beginning to move forward with now, and we expect to have a fair amount more to say over the coming year in this area. The project will draw from a database that H.D. Harvey has access to that is fairly detailed in terms of the presence of bird species up and down the California coast based on surveys spanning several decades. And so putting those data together with some of the offshore wind sighting and modeling work that we've done, I think will provide some really important insights into ways to hopefully both identify risks and perhaps manage risks. Moving on to seismic hazards. If the statement is there are significant potential geologic hazards within the region that will need to be investigated and addressed for possible development of an offshore wind farm, we know that significant geologic hazards exist in our region. The analysis that's been conducted to date in this area is based on existing data. This is another area where primary data collection is needed, including geologic studies specific to the Humboldt Col area. There's also a need for additional work regarding the impact of these geologic hazards on offshore wind systems, including both the onshore and the offshore infrastructure. In our report series, reports 16 and 17 relate to this, and we also covered this in webinar number 2. Moving on to the permitting process. If the statement is the permitting process is complex, involves multiple permitting agencies and would take place over several years, we know that the permitting process is definitely a complex one involving multiple agencies. We also know that the permitting process will include opportunities for public input, and I think that will be an incredibly important part of this process. An upcoming step in that process could involve a BOEM lease auction, and once that lease auction takes place, it could take 5 to 7 years for development of a wind farm to take place. So we're not expecting turbines in the water in the very, very near future. It'll take some time for this to play out. And a forthcoming report, which will be number 15 in our series, relates to this topic. And in relationship just to the geography of the BOEM Col area, I thought this was an appropriate place to bring in a quote from Harrison Ebach of the Humboldt Fishermen's Marketing Association in relationship to fishing industry concerns. In the 4th webinar, Harrison Ebach said, if you were to ask fishermen what they really think about offshore wind, I think you might find that most fishermen will oppose it. The most definitive impact would be a loss of fishing grounds. A lot of people think that we can go fishing everywhere in the ocean, but that really is not the case. If you were to draw a map of the ocean and carve out the rockfish conservation areas where we can't fish, and the essential fish habitats where we can't fish, the marine protected areas that we can't fish, and there's a laundry list of other areas, we really can't afford to lose any more fishing grounds. And that's a good lead in, I think, to the final area that I'll mention, which is related to information that our team gathered about the perspectives of community members and other interested parties, doing a series of interviews and meetings over the period from 2018 to 2020. If an outcome or a statement coming out of this is that there are a variety of perspectives related to offshore wind development on the North Coast, it's clear and unsurprising that many different perspectives exist. And I think one thing that we found both from this webinar series and from discussions over the months leading up to it is that many people and groups are in a learning mode at this point. There's a strong interest to learn more about the various dimensions of offshore wind. And I think many people are still forming their perspectives and are interested in gathering more information to learn more about this. So I'll close out with just two final, in terms of reports, reports number 2021 and 22 and webinar 4 are relevant to this area. And now I'll close out with just a couple of quotes. The first one from Mike Wilson from the 4th webinar. He said, climate change is a driver for why we are here, why we are discussing these issues today. The status quo of energy and the status quo of our existence on the planet is not going in the right direction. And we are having these conversations because we need, from a global perspective, to address that. And then from another government leader here on the North Coast, Jason Ramos, tribal council member from the Blue Lake Rancheria, in the first webinar stated, there's a long history in Humboldt County of boom and bust cycles with industries. We saw it first with gold, we saw it with timber, we saw it most recently with cannabis. And so what we see in these industries is that there's an impact on the environment during the course of resource extraction. And then the citizens of Humboldt County and the tribes are left with the environmental impacts when people leave. So we're concerned that this isn't another one of those scenarios, that is not just an investment in wind infrastructure or electrical infrastructure, but it's an investment in people and human capital, that there's some long lasting prospect for job opportunities for the citizens of Humboldt County. And I think I'll close with that, which is essentially, I think, a call to ensuring that if we proceed with offshore wind development, that is done right, and that is done with thoughtfulness about the environment, and as well as the job opportunities and economic development for people here on the North Coast. So with that, thank you very much, and I will pass things back to Sarah.
Thank you, Arnie. Super helpful to have the highlights of the webinars and the cliff notes of the reports. So thanks for providing that. I'll just take a moment to share my screen. Okay, perfect. So for folks that have submitted questions and comments during Arnie's presentation, we will come back to those during the community Q&A discussion in a little bit. So thanks for your patience. And for this next agenda item, we're really honored to have with us 3 representatives from state and federal agencies that are willing and excited to share with us their agency's visions and plans for continuing to explore offshore wind energy development on the North Coast. They'll be providing information about how community members and other interested parties can continue to stay informed and engaged in the various upcoming processes. So at this time, I would like to welcome our panelists. So welcome to Chris Potter, Program Manager from Ocean Protection Council. Welcome to Nessie Sumite, Chief Renewable Energy, Pacific Region, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. And our final welcome to Eli Harland, Advisor to Commissioner Karen Douglas from the California Energy Commission. So thanks to all of you for being here today. And just as a reminder for the panel discussion, I will pose an initial question that I would like for all three of you to answer. And then I will follow up with a question to each of you that's a bit more specific to your agency's role in the offshore wind landscape. And then I'll close by asking a final question to each of you to address. And if needed, I will find a suitable place to interrupt if we're running tight on time, because we really do want to make sure we can hear from all of you. And if you haven't done so already, I invite you to turn on your videos so that we can put a face to the voice. And just a reminder to keep yourself on mute until you are until you're speaking, obviously. Okay, so now I will stop screen sharing so that we can see folks. Okay, let me just do a scroll. Great, I'm seeing everyone. Okay, so in this order, Chris, Nessie, and Eli, would you please describe the current and upcoming research and development activities that your agency is supporting in relation to exploring offshore wind development in California? What aspects of this work are you most excited about, and what is their significance? And please, for each of you, limit your response to about 3 minutes. Thank you.
Well, that's going to be tough.
Well, we do have the follow-up Q&A, so welcome you to elaborate at that point in time.
Thank you. Thank you. First, I wanted, this is, hi, everybody. I'm Chris Potter. I'm with the Ocean Protection Council.
Oh, it appears, at least on my end, Chris, that we have lost you. Maya, are you also seeing that? Perfect. So while we get Chris unfrozen, let's turn to Nessie and hear her remarks. Nessie, welcome you to.
I'm a program manager there.
Chris?
Among many things I work on.
Chris? Chris, I'm so sorry. This is Sarah. We have been unable to hear your response, and you just came in a bit garbled. Okay, I will ask our production team to work with Chris behind the scenes to get that figured out. Sorry about that. Okay, Nessie, would love you to kick us off.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. I want to first congratulate the Schatz Energy Center. I mean, this has been a wonderful webinar series, and we've already learned a lot. And we look forward to their continuing work and those by others. I think most people know who BOEM is. It's the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and we oversee the environmental and economic responsible development of offshore energy and mineral resources on the OCS. And our activities are underlain by environmental studies programs. So we're very keen on having the best available science in all of our decision making. Currently, we have about 20 active studies, roughly about $22 million just on the Pacific for offshore renewable energy. These studies will provide research in needed areas in a wide range of topics. You can download the listing of all the ongoing completed studies on our website, and I think I provided a link to the Schatz team. But I want to highlight some examples of the work that we are currently doing. BOEM is partnering with NOAA, the National Ocean Atmospheric and Administration, on a passive acoustic study to understand the occurrence and distribution of protected whale, dolphin, and porpoise species within the California current. This study leverages the time on NOAA research vessels, and drifting recorders cost less than the bottom mounted recorders. So there's an opportunity to cover more area. So we're excited about that. We're also partnering with NOAA and USGS and the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute to conduct some seafloor mapping and site characterization studies. And so that data will help us to evaluate the structural integrity of any proposed energy projects and real and potential environmental impacts to seafloor habitats. Another study that is a direct result of feedback from the Northern California stakeholders is our Black Brant over migration study. The study will collect data on overwater migration routes for Black Brant along the Pacific coast to understand pathways, timing, and flight altitude. On the Central Coast, Cal Poly is doing some additional studies on offshore wind scenarios off the Central Coast of California. And I think it's also worth noting that BOEM is also supporting work to help address the challenges to offshore wind development. For example, I think Arnie mentioned that NREL just published a state-of-the-art offshore wind resource data set offshore California. This leverages the R&D advancements since the release of the wind toolkit in 2013. One of the key improvements is that they are dealing now with a 20-year modeling period compared to the 7-year modeling period in the wind toolkit. So that's really helpful. And in order to understand the model data, we are working with, we're funding the Pacific Northwest National Laboratories deployment of the LiDAR buoys. One has been deployed in offshore Humboldt and the other one will be offshore Morro Bay. Each of these buoys will be equipped with instrumentation to capture a suite of measurements such as wind speed, direction, at multiple heights, air and surface temperature, ocean current, speeds and directions, wavelengths, etc. And so all that data will be collected and it will be available to the public. And so it will help to ground truth the previously modeled data. And in the spring, the plan is for the LiDAR buoy to be outfitted with a PNNL developed avian measurement system. It's a thermal tracker. So the system consists of thermal cameras and software that uses stereo vision processing to provide 3D flight data about birds and bats around wind turbines. So that's pretty cool that we're able to work with others. We're also facilitating the California Public Utilities Commission's consideration of offshore wind in California's energy resource portfolio through work by NREL. NREL will be providing an updated cost model for floating offshore wind, and so that offshore wind can be considered as potential options for the California resource. So that's really another one that's I think helpful to advancing offshore wind. And you've heard the Schatz Energy presented in this webinar series, BOEM-funded studies to understand feasibility, scale, and transmission options of offshore wind generation on the North Coast. So BOEM is providing additional funding to continue their work, and they will also update the information that they have with the most recent wind resource data that has been developed by NREL. BOEM has an annual studies development program, and it's a 2-year planning period. And we're beginning to formulate the 2022 and 23 studies development plan, covering all of the potential areas that would be of interest to BOEM. And so we expect that there will be an open solicitation in early November. And so we encourage you to submit ideas for consideration for research in the Pacific OCS. You can also, we will provide a link to the solicitation in our website. And I think that's it for right now. I think the thing that's most exciting is just the level of collaboration that we see in the area of research, data gathering, and information sharing that is going on throughout the state. I think working together, we can ensure that we will have the best available science to help guide future decision-making with regards to offshore wind development. Thank you.
Love it. Thanks, Messi. So Chris, let's come back over to you and try again. You were so excited. I'm sorry that happened.
Yeah, I think I fixed the problem. So I'll just kind of jump into it rather than repeating some of the other stuff. So in addition to the North Coast Offshore Wind Feasibility Study, which is just wrapping up, the OPC is funding a joint study with the Conservation Biology Institute and the Point Blue Conservation Science. Outcomes of that study will include spatial modeling to highlight areas with maximum energy production benefit and least impact on established ocean uses diversity. So we're talking about fishing, we're talking about whales, other marine mammals, pelagic birds. And the results from that work will be available through the California Offshore Wind Energy Gateway, which is hosted by the Energy Commission. Ultimately, this work will allow stakeholders, decision makers, and the public to examine features of interest, including energy potential, physical constraints, existing ocean uses, and environmental considerations via interactive maps to facilitate scientifically based decision making. I'm happy to say that just last week, the Ocean Protection Council and the Humboldt Fishermen's Marketing Association executed or signed a grant agreement, and it's for a mapping project that will directly involve North Coast fishermen from Del Norte, Mendocino, and of course Humboldt counties. That project will probably take, well, it's unclear given the challenges of COVID how long this project will take, but I'll be providing more information, and I assume the Humboldt Fishermen's Marketing Association will be providing information to the public as this project rolls out. We are also in conversations with a number of federal agencies, the the Energy Commission about a joint solicitation in 2021, or a coordinated environmental research solicitation in 2021. And I expect to have more developments around that joint solicitation later this month or sometime in November. I think the thing, like Nessie had pointed out, or I agree with Nessie, the thing that really excites me the most here is just the level of cooperation among all the state and federal agencies and NGOs and industry around identifying what are the key environmental considerations and stakeholder considerations, where there are data gaps. I think that's worked well, and I look forward to additional work with Humboldt State, for instance, and other California universities.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris. Over to you, Eli, and let me know if you need me to repeat the question.
No, I think I do recall the question, Sarah. Thank you. And also just wanted to second Nessie and Chris giving Arnie and his team the support, but also the recognition for pulling off these webinars. I think that the format of these has been really helpful and interesting, and Arnie, good job going through and summarizing some of the key points from those, and seeing some of the quotes brought back some memories of those webinars. So good job tying it all together after a multiple week series. It's not easy to do, so I thought it was good. And so the CEC, I'll give an update sort of on some things we see for the future when it comes to supporting sort of the research and development side of offshore wind. And so recently, and this was already presented in a past webinar, so I won't go into great detail, but the CEC is working with the Public Utilities Commission, and we're also working with the Air Resources Board on Senate Bill 100 evaluation. And so part of doing that evaluation is preparing, or the agencies have prepared different portfolios to test against being able to achieve the SB 100 goals of 100% renewable energy and zero carbon resources by 2045. And so that work right now, the joint agencies have presented draft results of what some of those portfolios sort of look like directionally. Obviously, that work isn't a state plan in the sense of how we might think of a state plan for infrastructure, but it gives us directionally sort of a point of view on where the important trade-offs are in the decision-making framework. So in that process, the agencies have those draft results out. They've received comments following a workshop back in September, and the next step is for the joint agencies is to put out a draft report and then finalize that report by January 1st of this year and submitted to the legislature as required by law. So that's really going to be a major thing happening. Obviously, it's larger than offshore wind specifically, but I thought important to highlight that's going on. And then in our other space, in our research and development division, the CEC has the electric program investment charge program, which EPIC is the acronym for it. And Arnie, you spoke to it a bit earlier when you were talking about some of the recent studies. So the EPIC program funds R&D activities on behalf of the electric ratepayers of the investor-owned utility territories. So about 80% of the state or so, and the CEC in partnership with the electric or with the investor-owned utilities implement the EPIC R&D program. And so currently the EPIC program is just initiating 4 new projects that have been awarded. One of those already highlighted, and the EPIC program has 3 others, and really the focus on those is technology development and environmental research and looking for potential environmental solutions within that technology development. And so the EPIC program also recently prepared in partnership with Guidehouse Consulting, basically a priority list needs assessment of offshore wind and R&D, really as a tool, and this was developed through a stakeholder process, but as a tool to help guide some of the future investments that the EPIC program makes into offshore wind. And so coming out of that, currently the EPIC staff has a proposal for, or a draft research concept, I should call it. It's like a proposal for potential areas to invest a new round of EPIC funding. And so at this point, the EPIC staff is not, hasn't put out a competitive amount of money or isn't throwing a budget out there for this, but the EPIC staff is starting to gear up because it takes a while to go from sort of concept to actually putting money out on the street and taking applications for those. So, but they're currently accepting comments on that draft concept. There should be a link available, I think, on the slide that we'll show later, and you can find it there. And on the 22nd, so Thursday, there's a public workshop that you can join if you'd like to learn more about that concept. And then comments for that are due in early November. So, but we can provide more information on that EPIC research priority. So, and I think that covers it. If there were other questions though from my panelists, I wasn't sure.
Thanks, Eli. That's perfect for this question. And yes, we do plan to share out those links, interactively through the chat, and also have some slides later on that show that information as well. Okay, so our next question is for Nessie. Nessie, would you please describe the lease auction process and timeline for the Humboldt Call area? We've had a lot of interest in this.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Well, I want to kind of take a step back, and in the Pacific region, we're working in 3 states, and I want to just clarify because I think there's some confusion in earlier webinar about one of those states. We're doing work in Hawaii, in Oregon, and in California. So in Hawaii, we've identified 3 call areas offshore Oahu, and we are working with the state and DoD there to try to determine whether there are areas offshore Oahu that are more compatible with military uses. In Oregon, we are currently processing an unsolicited lease request for a marine hydrokinetic research lease for a wave energy test facility. And with regards to offshore wind in Oregon, at the BOEM Oregon Intergovernmental Renewable Energy Task Force in June of 2020, the state and BOEM committed to offshore wind planning with a meaningful and effective data gathering and engagement process, which we plan to begin soon to inform the identification of a call area appropriate for leasing. So we are just beginning the process in Oregon. And so I wanted to clarify that there are no BOEM call areas offshore Oregon. There is a local group in Southern Oregon called Ocean that are being proactive in the community about offshore wind. And we appreciate their interest and we do try to stay apprised of their efforts, but that is separate from the BOEM process that we will be doing with the state. So again, no call areas offshore Oregon. So here in California, BOEM has been working with the state, particularly the California Energy Commission and the Ocean Protection Council to explore the opportunities for offshore wind development. And most of the folks in this webinar know that there's competitive interest for commercial leasing for California's offshore wind development. And we have identified the 3 call areas, 2 on the Central Coast, Morro Bay and Diablo Canyon, and the Humboldt call area on the North Coast. So the next step in the BOEM leasing process is to identify what we call wind energy areas for environmental review for potential leasing. Once the wind energy area or WEAs are identified, then we can begin the environmental process, the analysis of that area. And then we will develop leasing documents to seek and define the terms of a future wind energy lease auction. So after the wind energy area, we do an environmental review, and then we will publish something called like a proposed sale notice that will be out, and it will include the parameters of the auction after the preliminary sale notice is out and commented on, then we do a final sale notice. And so as for timing for a Humboldt wind energy auction, I think we will be in a better position to make that call once we've defined and identified wind energy areas for California. And I just want to note that a lease from BOEM does not authorize construction. The lease just allows the lessee to submit plans for site characterization and analysis and all of the assessments that they need to do in order to provide a construction and operations plan for BOEM to review. And it's not until the construction and operation plan is approved that steel in the water will occur. So it's early in the process. We still have a ways to go. And so we'll continue the engagement process both on the North Coast and the Central Coast.
Very helpful. Thank you, Nessie. So Chris and Eli, I welcome you to support each other in this question. What is the state's role in upcoming leasing, regulatory, and permitting processes related to offshore wind development? What conversations or decisions are expected to occur in the short term, about a year, and longer term, about 5 years?
Chris, can I let you take it first?
You want me to take it first? Okay. I guess I'll start with the near term. I mean, there are a couple things that that the Energy Commission and the Ocean Protection Council and other state agencies are collaborating on in terms of sort of documenting the state regulatory process and how it would dovetail with the federal process. In terms of an immediate state regulatory action, that would be, the first action would be when BOEM announces a lease sale and there's an environmental assessment to go with the lease sale. The California Coast Commission would make a determination. It's called a consistency determination, a determination that the BOEM action is consistent with the California Coastal Act. And then after that, there really isn't a whole lot of state regulatory action until there's actually a project proposed, and that you have that you begin to see what the impact. What permitting would be required for a project that would have elements that go into state waters after up to 3 miles. and there's a whole host of permitting out of the California Environmental Quality. The state has this Endangered Species Act, State Lands Commission would theoretically, well, not theoretically, would issue a lease for any types of cables that would be coming to shore. But as I think Nessie has pointed out, or maybe Eli, that offshore wind anywhere on the California coast is a long-term prospect, and the soonest that there'd be any kind of regulatory action by the state agency would be the Coastal Commission, as I mentioned, with consistency. Eli, you want to build off of that at all?
Yeah, I think that's a part of the process, right? Is the regulatory environment and the permitting piece of that. But there's other things that occur at the state or locally too that facilitate development or part of that development process, right? So earlier I mentioned SB 100, which is the analytical work that's being done now to look at sort of potential directions going forward. And then earlier, Nessie had mentioned, and in Arnie's comments had talked about the Public Utility Commission IRP process and how that links to procurement. And so that's the other side of what I think you said over the next year, or maybe over the next 5 years, but like in that time frame, we're seeing different resources evolve in those planning processes. So offshore wind characterizations are maybe improving some because of some updates that are being done to the resource assessments. And the same is true for other technologies that are on the table for sort of achieving those long-term goals. And so I think really that's going to be one of the spaces, in addition to the permitting environment, is going to need the work, is that planning plus procurement environment. And and we'll probably get to this a little bit more later on, but Chris, you touched on this, that those are sort of things that happen out of sort of, I wouldn't say mechanics isn't the right word, but they sort of go their way. The regulations are there and we process things, but there's the piece of this too, which is the sort of the community stakeholder public engagement side of things, because we are talking about potentially putting large infrastructure into environments to achieve some of these goals, and we need to be able to do that in a way that doesn't just get us to those goals, but does so in a way that's sustainable. So,
Sarah, I just would. There's one thing that I think I should have mentioned, and part of what the OPC is doing now with the research that is funding is hopefully preparing state agencies for the environmental analyses that it will have to do for a project.
Perfect. Thank you both for providing that information and, yes, building upon each other. So for our final question, would love to have Chris, Nessie, and Eli address this question. How have community outreach and engagement efforts taken shape at your respective agencies in relation to exploring offshore wind for the California North Coast during this early stage? Importantly, as we look ahead, how can stakeholders in the community continue to stay informed and participate in upcoming processes? And again, please limit each of your responses to about 3 minutes. Thank you.
Well, if you don't mind, I think I'll let Eli go first. I mean, simply that the OPC has really been in a supporting role to both BOEM and the Energy Commission. The OPC was created under statute to coordinate the ocean and coastal activities of state agencies, but So, we see our role here. We have a large constituency and supporters that we have been, in contact with here on a regular basis. But anyway.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for the opening comment on that. And I think that's true. It's the outreach that the state has done, and that I guess the Energy Commission has been a part of and has been doing with the OPC and then with other state agencies, so the Coastal Commission, the State Lands Commission. But I think importantly is a lot of that outreach and the ability to do the outreach we have done to date has been with partnership with BOEM. So it's really having this important state and federal relationship to understand each other's processes, but then understand sort of each other's objectives and goals, so that the interest of the state, the interest of of BOEM, but then the interest of local communities we can try to have those reflected in find places that that may make the most sense for this development, and we're taking we're considering the right voices and the right things as we do that. So it has been the public process to date has really been supported a lot by BOEM, and BOEM's been very open to having this as a partnership with the state and really letting us sort of join in a cooperative outreach process. And I think there's a link also that can be shared that goes to a stakeholder outreach report that is on BOEM's website that reflects a lot of outreach that was done leading up to the call areas that Nessie mentioned. And so there really has been a partnership there. And then from the Energy Commission's side, we don't do all of the outreach, and we don't do all of the communication for the entire state or for this process, but we do a lot of it. So it's if you're interested in following what's happening sort of at the state level with offshore wind, I would suggest joining the list server that the Energy Commission manages that will give you up-to-date information. So if we have public meetings and we put a notification out, we would send it through a list server like that, or the opportunity that I mentioned earlier with EPIC and research and development, we would communicate through that list server. So if you're willing to sacrifice a small part of your inbox, you can be connected at least to that state communication channel there.
Perfect. Thank you, Eli. We actually did have a question that was seeking some clarification on the pathway for the community to share feedback in relation to EPIC. Could you just since you mentioned it again, could you just clarify that for another minute or two? And whether that's open to all community members and stakeholders, or it's a invite-only invitation?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's a public workshop to take comments on a current concept for research and to take input on that. So what I can do is I will send should I send a link through the chat to the website that has more information about the workshop? I think it's got the timing of the workshop and sort of the draft paper and how to submit comments on that.
Perfect. I think that would be great. And just to say, I think we do have a slide that shares this, but I just wanted to be clear. So when we get there, we'll confirm whether that is indeed the same workshop that you're mentioning. So please do send out information. Thank you. Awesome. Okay, so I interrupted our flow. Would love for Nessie to also provide your insights regarding community outreach and engagement plans.
Great, and I think the community Q&A has, through these webinars, have provided additional source of stakeholder inputs and comments. So that's been very helpful overall. BOEM's mechanism for planning for offshore wind is really the Renewable Energy Task Force, and we do that in partnership with the state. And I think it's a good way to bring all levels of government at the same table, all feds, California agencies, federal recognized tribes, local electeds are able to participate in the task force, and all the task forces are also publicly noticed, and public is open to participate in them. So in addition to those, we have gone out and done, over the past few years, the public meetings, one-on-one on coastal, et cetera. And like Eli said, we documented the results of all of the comments that we received in that summary outreach report that I believe Schatz has a link to. So that's on the BOEM website. And that report only contains information up until like September 2018. And so the plan is we're going to be updating that with more recent outreach efforts. And so look for that publication to be updated in the coming weeks. And any kind of spatial data that we have collected is put in a portal, the database. And that's also transparent and available to the public. And so anyone can take a look at those data sets and maps. And I think going forward, I think everyone believes that transparency is critical, and we need to provide consistent information whenever we can. If you want to sign up on the BOEM website, there is a link there to receive any BOEM California renewable energy news and updates. If we have any notices of public meetings or webinars, those are published, and our partners have been generous, including the Energy Commission, been generous in putting them in their listservs as well for a wider dissemination. So that's another way to stay in touch. And at various points in the BOEM process, we publish documents in the Federal Register. For example, when we published a call for information, we received well over 100 comments. So all of those comments are going to be factored into future decision making. And there's also a citizens guide. I know sometimes when we review the leasing process, it just sounds so complicated. So the citizens guide, which you can download from our website, is non-technical, hopefully concise, to show you how you can follow the process, the leasing process with BOEM. Thanks.
Fantastic. Okay. So thank you to all of our panelists for those insights and next steps. I'm sure that our attendees are very eager to learn how they can continue to stay informed. So thank you. Just going to share my screen for a moment as we move into the next agenda item. Okay, perfect. And just to acknowledge that we have been getting questions and comments through the Q&A and the email. So thank you. And we're going to address those momentarily. So in addition to the fantastic panelists that we've just heard from, we do have the pleasure of welcoming additional folks and colleagues of our panelists to help support this next agenda item related to questions around next steps that many of you submitted during the discussion. So I would like to take a moment to introduce two more panelists. We have Lisa Gilbane from Environmental Analysis Section, Chief BOEM Pacific Office, and we have Sharon Kramer from H.T. Harvey and Associates. So welcome to you both. Invite you to turn on your video and give us a wave hello. We look forward to hearing from you. And before getting into the questions and the perspectives that we've received from folks, just wanted to take a brief moment to invite everyone to fill out the webinar experience survey. It is a Google form, and it's your opportunity to share feedback about today's experience before you go. So we just wanted to raise this now in case folks are unable to stay with us until the conclusion of the webinar series. So the link is shown on your screen, and I believe we will drop that into the chat. And again, welcome you to visit that survey for a couple of minutes before you depart. All feedback will be anonymous. It's important to say. Okay, so now I will stop screen sharing and just wanted to say that as we move into the community Q&A discussion, really wanted to set the intention for all of us to engage, continue to engage in this collaborative and respectful discussion. Today's discussion provides an opportunity to ask and learn about the next steps related to developments that could take place in your community. And we all know that there could be both positive and negative impacts on your lives and livelihood. So this is the opportunity to learn how to stay informed and engaged. We have just under about 40 minutes for this discussion, so I'm hopeful and confident that there's sufficient time to hear from many of you and that this time together can be productive. So again, continue to invite questions via the Q&A. We will read out a mix of questions and comments that reflect a variety of perspectives and address those to who we think is the appropriate person, but welcome our panelists to chime in if you have more to add. I'm not meaning to box anybody in by addressing you. And also just wanted to mention one more time that the Schatz Center will be providing documentation of all the questions and statements that were submitted during the webinar, and this will be made available to the public in an effort to increase transparency. And once more, those questions and comments in that document will not have any identifying information unless you specifically choose to include your name and other information like your affiliation. And if you do so, then you are giving consent for that information to be shared publicly. Okay, so let's get started and build on the insights and the information that our panelists have just shared. So our first question is to Nessie. Is there any information on the process to insert community benefit scoring criteria into the BOEM auction scoring framework so that BOEM would formally consider bidder contributions beyond bid price in their award decision?
Thanks for the question. Under current regulations, there is an opportunity to have a lease auction that is based on incorporating multiple factors that we can consider, and they would basically get a credit for various things. And I think the appropriate time to do that would be, I mean, you could submit any suggestion at any time, but once we do decide that there's a leasing process, then we'll publish a proposed sale notice, and the parameters of the lease auction will be included there, and you can provide comments at that time as well. But currently, there is a provision that we could have an auction that has multiple factors considered in addition to simply the dollar value.
Thanks, Nessie. Okay, we have a question for Arnie or Sharon. That's why I said Aaron, combining the two of you. Is the buoy in the call area measuring wind speed at the ocean surface or higher up at an altitude that may be more relevant to the large turbines being contemplated?
I can start there, and maybe Sharon, you can chime in. I think the short answer to that is that the buoy will measure wind speed both at close to sea level at the buoy height, as well as in the wind column above it. The measurement that's close to sea level is there are actually a couple of sensors that do that on the buoy, including a cup anemometer, and then there's a LiDAR system that's used to look up through the wind column, and it can capture wind speed data as a function of height. And so the wind speed will be measured a few different ways, and there will be data that can be used to determine wind speeds at altitudes that are relevant to the hub height of the wind turbine, and even higher than that. Sharon, anything you want to add to that?
Oh, sorry, Sharon, you're actually on mute.
Sorry about that. I do understand that there are, I'm concurring with you, Arnie, that it will be measuring wind speed at several levels above, the immediate height of the buoy itself, but there is an endpoint. I don't know what that is. So, but I think the purpose of it is to try to measure relevant wind speeds in the rotor swept area. So.
Perfect. Okay, thank you both. We have a question to Nessie from Vivian Hallowell. Commercial fisheries provide local seafood to help with national food security. How will impacts to seafood providing fisheries and associated industries in the community be minimized and mitigated as required in the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, sections 388 and 18A1?
I think that, fishing, the industry is very important. And, we've heard throughout the webinar, this is more than just a job, it's a livelihood for some. And so I think BOEM is looking at this very closely. I think we first begin with the data and outreach with the fishermen, and we engage, we would like to continue to engage with the fishing industry to see if there's a way that, there could be a win-win, as I think Congressman said. It's an important issue. It is something that we are going to have to consider going forward and considering, but I think it's a continuous dialogue with the fishing industry. And I think it begins with, just sharing data on both sides as well. And hopefully we can get to, something going forward that would work for both parties.
Thank you, Nessie. We have a question directed to Lisa. Can you please clarify how state and federal environmental permitting processes would dovetail?
Hello. Well, thank you for the question. This is Lisa. I'm from the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. That's a complex question, but I think we are starting on the right foot, which is working together, especially through the task force, and coming up with a strategy together, because it can't just be the feds, it can't just be BOEM, it has to be timed with the state of California as well as tribal groups. So everybody has to work together to get through every stage of the process. And therefore we're starting as early as we can to get that ball moving.
Thanks, Lisa. We have a question to Sharon or Chris from Bill Gorham. What California agency would be the lead for CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, for offshore wind?
I'll take a stab and then Sharon can correct me. More than likely the State Lands Commission or a local jurisdiction, like the Humboldt Harbor District, for instance. But Professor Kramer?
Yeah, likely it's the State Lands Commission, because there will be a lease through state waters. So the cable will have to go through state waters to its onshore landing. And then there's probably going to be some interaction with the Harbor District, as you noted, Chris, because there's drilling and things that have to happen in the bay that the Harbor District has jurisdiction of. So, but I think the lead agency will be the State Lands Commission.
Perfect, thank you both. We are now going to read out a comment from an anonymous attendee. It would be helpful in moving the process forward at a quicker pace if the state could appoint an offshore wind energy czar. Such a person could help nudge the process along by consolidating requests of the various permitting agencies so that duplications could be avoided. That person may also work at the state level to speed things along with the various state agencies involved. So thank you for that comment. Any questions or comments from our panelists?
I think the one maybe like reaction or sort of insight on that is that when the state was supporting and developing renewables, sort of like in the ARA days, like around 2010 and going forward, there were an organized group of agency leadership, the sort of like the principals, and folks in the governor's office who were focused and organized around permitting for like some of the large solar projects, some of the important wind projects and transmission projects. And so there is a model that's existed in the past to focus on on technologies like this to sort of bring things together. So it's not I'm not sure if that's something that's contemplated yet here or is under consideration, but definitely have heard that comment before and that concept. And so it also kind of, you have to start thinking too, because it's when you start selecting one technology to support it like that, it's a little bit more challenging in the state because we tend to take a sort of a technology neutral approach, but then you have to also look at what it might take to get particular technologies off the ground. And it might take that sort of special focused approach to doing it with a model like the one that was described in the comment. But I don't think that conversation's been like completely had yet, but like we definitely hear that. So, and I know that Chris has sort of a perspective, I'm sure, on that because of OPC's role is sort of convening at least the resources side of the agencies when it comes to the ocean. So.
No, I was just going to riff off of what you said, and I suspect that folks have, especially in the North Coast, are well aware of the pace at which offshore wind development is happening on the East Coast. And I would just point out that those states have different mandates. They have specific targets for offshore wind development. And in California, as Eli pointed out, we're technology neutral and different renewables have to compete in the marketplace. That's current state policy.
Perfect. Thank you both for those insights. We have a question to Nessie from Jordan King. Will the BOEM lease auction be awarded to one developer or potentially to multiple developers and technologies for the total area identified? Is the lease auction only open to offshore wind or also wave technology and other technologies?
The auction will be specific for a particular technology. So this would be, if we ended up doing offshore wind, it would be offshore wind. We haven't identified, again, we're still in the call area, how many lease areas we're going to have. And so it's premature to know how many potential leases we could have. But, I think the practice is that, we would have one developer per lease. So even if you had like 2 or 3 lease areas, one developer won't be able to get that.
Perfect. Thank you, Nessie. We have a question from Andy Colonna, and this is directed to anyone. How well would the smallest version of this project serve to meet Humboldt energy needs and fishing, navigation, and commerce in and around Humboldt Bay? And so I just want to clarify before anybody addresses this, that at this time there is no project that is proposed. The Schatz Center's research has included modeling several potential scenarios. Just wanted to clarify that. And now I open it up.
I can start to provide at least a portion of the answer for that. And so the smallest scenario that we studied was a 50 megawatt wind farm, which we consider to be a pilot scale effort. In terms of energy generation, we estimated that could provide about 25% of the local energy demand on an annual basis. So from that perspective, it would provide a significant fraction, but certainly not all of it. In terms of fishing, navigation, and commerce, I think that the difference between a 50 megawatt wind farm and a 150 megawatt wind farm, which were the 2 smaller scenarios that we looked at, I don't know that there would be very significant differences between the port and harbor infrastructure needs between those 2. And so I think the scenarios that got discussed in the third webinar, I think, are a good place to look in terms of what the infrastructure and navigation needs are in relationship to that. In terms of the footprint in the ocean, obviously, if you have a 50 megawatt wind farm that's just taking up a very small portion of the call area, that's going to be quite different than a full build out in terms of the footprint of that project. I think in the first webinar, we talked a bit about the footprint. I don't remember the number offhand, but it is a fairly small fraction of that of the overall call area that would be required for a 50 megawatt footprint. And so if one of the parameters that is of greatest interest to the fishing industry is the fraction of the an area that might be might become restricted for fishing activities because of the location of the turbines, then obviously a smaller one would have less impact. I think the other thing to consider in all of that in terms of the smallest is that the economics, I think, would be quite challenging for the very smallest projects. And so it might be something that would make sense to do on a pilot basis, but I think most developers would not be interested in doing that if there wasn't some pathway to being able to develop something larger. At least that's what we've heard. And that's what the economics and economies of scale have indicated to us in the work that we've done so far. And certainly welcome if any of the other panelists want to add on to that.
This is Sharon. I'd like to add on that even the small footprint scenario, 50 megawatt project, the 150 megawatt project, will require cable to shore. And so they'll have that all in common, regardless of the size of the project. So I think Arnie's right. There are certain pieces of the project, the size offshore, that may be prohibitive to certain fishing activities. It really depends on the number of turbines out there, but they all have a cable to shore. They all have a lot of commonalities as well. So yeah, we did conclude in our environmental analysis that size is everything. Magnitude of impacts. A larger scale project will take longer to construct, will require just better improvements in the port infrastructure, and so on and so forth. So it all really does point to size is everything.
And I think I can add to that too. Like Arnie, you have the best perspective, I think, and Sharon too, on a question like this, because it's really about balancing all of the many perspectives and values, and sort of saying, okay, well, what fits right across all of these values. And, you know, as the CEC, we don't have just an energy angle, but we tend to take a pretty energy forward angle, I guess you could say. So we sometimes think of those numbers in terms of how does that contribute to a larger state portfolio potentially. And so I think if you're looking at really serving local needs, then I think the scale is something like on the lower scales you were talking about, Arnie, but there could be scenarios where that scale is a lot larger. I mean, it does not happen overnight at all. Planning it and deciding to do it takes probably as long as doing it in some cases. So it doesn't just happen overnight, but I think that's just important context to think about, because there is a world-class resource that is on the North Coast, and there are some very lofty, important goals in the state for achieving GHG and renewables goals. And so those two things, you know, tend to come together, and it's important to, you know, I think talk through those in the very early stages of this, in the beginning of it. So that's why a webinar like this and the work that Schatz has done is really important, because it does help be able to roll that work that's being done locally into a statewide perspective, and be able to apply that to a statewide perspective. So.
Perfect. Thank you both. We have a question for Nessie. During the webinar on October 5th, a question came in from a participant regarding the possibility of an offshore wind call area in Southern Oregon near Cape Blanco. Could you please clarify if there are plans for a call area near Cape Blanco or elsewhere along the Oregon coast?
Sure. I think I tried to address that in my opening remarks in response to one of the questions. We are just starting the planning process in Oregon. We're probably where we are now, where we were 2 years ago in California. We're just beginning the data gathering process. We have not identified any call areas. And so I think there's a local group that is called Ocean, and they're doing some proactive stakeholder outreach. And so that might be confusing folks, but that process is separate from BOEM. BOEM is just starting the process with the state, and in the coming weeks and months, then we will be starting our outreach process to see, what kind of call areas are available offshore Oregon. So right now, nothing.
Perfect. Thank you, Nessie. And I think you did address some of it in your opening remarks. We're just trying to make sure the information is super clear for folks. So thanks for your patience. Okay, we have a question directed to Sharon or Chris from Brian. Will the Coastal Commission have to weigh in on the location and impact of the easement for landfall of the transmission cable into the harbor?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Love it. Is that the end, or would you like to share anything about that process or the considerations?
It would be, and not only with the Coastal Commission, but the State Lands Commission too. And I, just based on experience with similar projects, it would be a very lengthy, it would be a very serious permit application.
Yeah, I agree. Most of my own experience with the Coastal Commission has been actually in restoration projects and trying to address impacts of what we're hoping are, improvements to the ecosystem. And it's still a very lengthy and complicated process for sure. So definitely they are a big player in that land, in that cable landing and other infrastructure that's coastal. Yeah.
Perfect. Love it. We have a question that's come in via email, and I think Arnie may be most suitable to address this, at least initially. I have heard rumors that Idle has expressed interest in using their semi-submersible designs in Humboldt. These appear shallower and easy to fabricate as they use concrete, which would be easier to assemble locally. I realize that Principal Power is the main partner with the Redwood Coast Energy Authority so far, but I am thinking the Idle platform might be better suited for Humboldt Bay navigation issues and fabrication ease. And I am wondering if this option is being considered. And also, Arnie, if you wouldn't mind maybe clarifying Idle, Principal Power, RCEA, just so that folks know who we're talking about in addition to the technical projects.
Sure. So I think this question is basically about the floating platform that the turbines might be or would be mounted on. And there are a few different floating platform suppliers in the industry, and there are different designs. And some, there are actually a bunch of different designs, but the semi-submersible design is the one that seems most likely to be deployed from our harbor because of the characteristics of the harbor. Within that, there are some designs that are based on steel platforms and some that are based on concrete. And so that's what this question is about. There's a suggestion here that the concrete platforms might be easier to assemble and more suitable for deployment from here. I'm not going to necessarily comment on that or comment on particular companies' technologies in which might be more suitable. But I will say that in terms of the question is, I'm wondering if this option is being considered. I guess it's important to clarify that none of us here are proposing a project. That would only happen after a lease auction and a particular developer or set of developers had the potential to begin moving forward. And it's those developers that would select which platform technology they wanted to propose at that point. And so I guess it doesn't really matter what opinion I have because I'm not part of that. I'm not part of a developer or part of that sort of a configuration. I do think that it is quite interesting to think about and for developers to think about which technologies will be most suitable given the characteristics of the harbor and navigation channel, et cetera. And I would assume that that's something that they'll think about quite carefully.
Thanks, Arnie. We have another question for you, Arnie, from Daniel Chandler. Did the Schatz Center's studies take into account the projected sea level rise in the harbor infrastructure analysis?
Yes, there was some consideration of that. Our partner for that piece of the work was Mott McDonald Engineering, and there was some consideration of sea level rise as well as tsunami hazards and other related issues in their analysis, and so that was covered. We didn't cover it in great detail in the third webinar, but there will be some material related to that in the report that comes out in relationship to that topic. That's one of the reports that's forthcoming, and we expect to be able to get that out in November.
Perfect. We will stay tuned. We have a question from B. Cooperman to anyone. How does this proposed project compare with Danish wind farms? So I'm not sure if folks are informed of those, but if so, welcome you to share your thoughts.
This is Nessie. I'll just take a stab. I mean, we are not proposing a project. And so I think most of the, I don't know which particular project that the individual was talking about, the OCS drops down very quickly here in the Pacific. And so whereas most offshore wind right now is bottom founded, you'll see floating offshore wind with the platforms that Arnie was just talking about earlier being deployed here. So that's one difference. I mean, out here, it's likely to be floating offshore wind.
The other thing I might add to what Nessie said too, I think Eli has been in contact with Danish folks recently too, but that their projects are much closer to shore, and the regulatory structure in Denmark is very, very different than the United States. There's a different type of cooperation between developers and the agencies. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. The state does have an MOU with the government of Denmark around this issue. So we've actually been in some more recent dialogues to explore additional synergies. But like Nessie and Chris pointed out, the two biggest things that are hard to comport over to California are it's a different technology under the water for these projects that it's being considered, and the regulatory environment and sort of the way that electricity products are developed and sold are completely different. So there are some things that we can adapt and learn from some of our international partners, but there are a lot of things that make California a little bit different, whether it's the technology or the environment itself.
Perfect. Thank you to the three of you. We have a question from an anonymous attendee, not directed to anyone in particular. Offshore wind can create significant economic benefits on the North Coast through the wind projects themselves, ongoing operations and maintenance, ancillary businesses, and other synergies like improved dredging. Will there be research on case studies of how operating wind farms have actually performed in terms of economic benefit and other community benefits?
So the research we've done so far has considered questions of economic development and job creation. That was based mostly on modeling work that draws from existing tools rather than studies of other cases, although there was some literature work that was done to inform that work. We don't currently have a project that would allow us to track how that has played out in other communities as some of these as efforts elsewhere go forward. But I agree that that's an interesting topic for consideration and would be a useful thing to track.
Sarah, I might add that I talked about future solicitations that the Ocean Protection Council would hold to support offshore wind planning and development, and certainly not only are we concerned about the environmental issues, but the socioeconomic is, especially when you're talking about development of what we call the blue ocean economy. So yes.
Great. Thanks, Arnie and Chris. Okay, so I'm very excited to say that we got through all the questions, and with the exception of the one I'm about to read. So that's great timing. And this final question is addressed to any and all of you. So it may be a question that you each want to provide a short response to. I'll take your lead. So the final question, and I'm just so stoked about the timing that worked out. The final question is, it can be challenging to track the many different paths of research, policy development, and permitting that could impact offshore wind development. Simultaneously, offshore wind development on the North Coast and here in Humboldt Bay could have a significant impact and bring significant opportunities to our region. How would you advise that local community members follow this discussion more efficiently over the next few years? And what is the most effective and meaningful way for your agencies to receive community feedback about our regional goals?
Well, I think I can start. So the last part of the question. So earlier I'd mentioned you can sign up for a listserv from the CEC website. From that same website, you can also submit comments into the docket that we use. It's basically the place for our record for offshore wind, and that doesn't close. So that docket's open. You can submit comments at any time. We do sometimes use the docket when there's a comment period or we're looking for comments on something specific. So we will have calls for that, but so that's one place to submit comments. The several folks, my boss, other people who work on offshore wind are all associated with that listserv. So a comment comes through and they're going to see that a comment comes through. And then I usually will remind folks that there's specific ones that need to be read that come through. So we look at those and we use that one. And then I think also part of the response is engagement from local communities into state processes is challenging too if there's not like a great platform for the state to communicate that. And it's one thing I've noticed just looking at other states, especially East Coast states, is sort of everyone does it a bit differently on not just their planning process and their stakeholder engagement, but also the way that they communicate using websites and like report processes. So I think this is a space where the CEC and the Ocean Protection Council and State Lands Commission can probably improve over the next 5 years is on the communication that comes from the state and is available for local communities. So I think it's going to be a two-part piece that's going to help improve those communication channels. And BOEM and the CEC already try to coordinate as much as we can on messaging. So if there's a public process or a stakeholder process that we're both engaged in, we try to use each other's communication channels to do that. So I think continuing to do that is also important. So Chris, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything.
No, I wholeheartedly agree with everything you said, especially the development of a state platform, especially since that we have the Energy Commission and the Ocean Protection Council have funded a substantial body of work that's just beginning to be realized, and that'll need to live somewhere, and I'll need to tell a story, and I can understand why folks might be a bit frustrated in that this is a process that will play out over many, many years, and we'll have to be very mindful that folks during a time of information vacuum will wonder what's going on. So that will have to be built into our outreach strategy going forward for sure. And the task force, for instance, is a great place to provide information, but given the nature of it, it doesn't meet as frequently as some other smaller, nimble kind of things could meet and perhaps disseminate information. So I'll leave it at that and let Nessie.
Just to add, and I think the good thing about working together with the state is that we do, like Eli said, share the information. So whatever is put into the CEC listserv, we will get that information. BOEM has a sign up for news update and BOEM announcement. You can put your name or email to on our website. And the task force is one way to engage, but I think we've done in the past and we'll continue to have smaller groups, even one-on-one, and to try, to reach out to as many people as we can. And certainly, if there are other ideas that, folks have, I think BOEM and the state would be interested in learning about it if there's a different way. I mean, certainly here, it would rather be in Northern California to do this and time to have face-to-face, but we're doing what we can, and it looks like we had over 100 people. So this one for what it is right now works. I think if others have any ideas on how we could improve the system, I think we all would be receptive to that.
Then this is Lisa. I'll just chime in that hopefully we can put some of those links in the chat or however, because we have the Oregon one, but there's a separate one for California. So if you just care about one state and you want to subscribe to California's group versus the Oregon for BOEM, you can select that. And then also I just want to say that for the CEC docket, we could post that too, maybe, because I end up seeing those comments. So they do get around and they're important. And in addition, emailing me or our region is another great way. If you have a question or comment that kind of can't wait or you can't find something, we can help you there.
Great question.
And I'll just say from the Schatz Center side of things that as we continue to do research, we will of course continue to share the results of that workout here on the North Coast and also with others who are interested. And if you're interested in staying in touch with the work that we're doing, you can email us at windstudies@schatzcenter.org, and we'll put you on a mailing list that's specific to this topic area. And as we develop work, we'll make sure that gets out to that list.
Okay, wonderful. So hearing lots of, listservs to join and websites. I believe those have been coming through in the chat. And then just to reiterate, we are working with our panelists and presenters and remark folk across the webinar series to get useful resources, and we'll include those in the summary. So please don't panic if these URLs are just going over your head. We'll make sure you have a place to find them. Okay, so thank you so much to all of you, our panelists, for a fantastic discussion. I'm so pleased that we were able to get through all the questions as well, and really grateful for your insightful comments and perspectives as far as next steps and how folks can stay engaged. So thank you again. I'm just going to take a second to share my screen. Okay. Perfect. So once more, we do have the link to the Google Form survey. It's shown on the screen. We will also include that link in the chat momentarily. We invite you to complete the survey by this Friday, October 23rd, and the link will be included in a follow-up email to registered participants along with other information. And just to say once more that feedback is anonymous and the responses may be included in a summary that will be developed for the webinar series without any identifiers. And thanks to those of you that have already completed the survey. Okay, so now just to wrap up the webinar, I'm going to talk a little bit about next steps on behalf of the Schatz Center team in terms of their offshore wind studies and the reports, and then we will move over to talk about next steps related to all the other agencies and the information that the panelists have just shared. So definitely invite you to visit the Schatz Center website, schatzcenter.org/wind. That's the wind specific page to access the California North Coast offshore wind studies reports. There are 20 of the 23 that are already available, and as Arnie mentioned earlier, the final reports are anticipated to be published very soon, certainly before the end of the year. So welcome you to visit and download those reports. The recording for today's webinar, plus any remaining webinar materials from the previous webinars, will be posted to the Schatz Center as well by the end of October. So this will include all of the agendas, webinar recordings, documentation of the Q&A and comments from webinar 4 and webinar 5, which is today's webinar, and the presentation slides. And if you haven't looked at the website recently, most of these materials have already been posted for the series. So we'll just be filling in the gaps in the last couple of weeks of October and into early November. The webinar series summary will be focused on highlighting the key themes, perspectives, and as I've mentioned, the resources. And this summary will be available by the end of November. Any questions, comments, perspectives, poll and survey results will be included at a high level and will be anonymous. The Schatz Center is also working on a webpage to share responses to some of the frequently asked questions about offshore wind for the California North Coast. And this webpage is expected to launch in November, and it's anticipated to be updated over time as new information is learned. Okay, so wanted to share information about a remote scoping workshop that may be of interest. I think this is what Eli and Chris have been referring to earlier. And I know that things have been included in the chat, so we may have already sent a link to this webpage, but just to be sure. So the California Energy Commission is seeking input on a draft research concept regarding development and testing of floating offshore wind energy technology. And the workshop is this Thursday. The information is on your screen. Please visit the link for more information and also to join via Zoom. We will also be dropping this link momentarily into the chat. Okay, so as we wrap up the webinar series, just wanted to share some of the resources that our panelists have recommended and may have mentioned as part of their remarks and responses. So as research, discussions, and planning continue, we do invite you to stay informed and engaged by checking these websites often for updates. The websites are showing on your screen. We will also copy them into the chat box. And again, they will be included in a follow-up email to participants as well as in the summary. So making sure you have the information in multiple places. So with that, I will invite Arnie to share his thank yous and his well wishes, and I will say my goodbye for now. So on behalf of Strategic Earth, thank you so much for the opportunity to facilitate this webinar series and today's really thoughtful community discussion. I will speak for our full team. We've certainly learned so much from all of our panelists, presenters, and our participants over the past several weeks. So thank you for inviting us to be a part of your journey. Stay safe, be well, and over to you, Arnie.
Thank you, Sarah, and a big thank you to everyone who participated in this session, audience members, panelists, and Congressman Huffman. Happy to provide some closing remarks as we finish up this 5-part webinar series. As we've discussed, the series has covered a wide range of topics related to the possibility of offshore wind development on the North Coast, and it draws from research that we've carried out over the last 18 months. Just to summarize the webinar series, the series has involved participation by 8 introductory speakers, 8 team members who have presented in the context of the series, 23 panelists from a range of different backgrounds, areas of expertise and perspectives, and all of the contributions from this group have played a big role in making the series what it was. We started the series back on September 14th, and since then, over 400 people have joined as audience members. Many people have joined in multiple sessions, so we're counting each of those people just once to get to that more than 400 total. To date, we've also had over 500 views of online recordings for the 4 prior webinars. So the video recordings are getting a lot of attention as well, and we expect those numbers to grow over time. We're very happy that there's strong interest in this topic, and we hope that the materials are useful and interesting to people coming from a wide variety of perspectives. I also want to give thanks once again to the Ocean Protection Council, the California Governor's Office of Planning and Research, and the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management for their support of our research, and to the Ocean Protection Council in particular for being our partner in sponsoring this webinar series. I also additionally want to acknowledge everyone from our extended research team at the Schatz Energy Research Center, as well as those who are at Humboldt State University more broadly, and our partners from H.D. Harvey, Mott MacDonald, and Pacific Gas and Electric. As I said earlier, this has very much been a collaborative effort as we work through this, both the research and the delivery of the webinar series. A very big thank you is also due to the facilitation team from Strategic Consulting, including Sarah Shen, Carolyn Kraft, and Kelly Sace, as well as all of their colleagues. I think they've done just a tremendous job, and the series has benefited immensely from their involvement. I'll close with a very special thank you from the production team, from the Schatz Center, which is led by Maya Kelly, with contributions from Carice Geronimo, Cassidy Barrientos, Nicole Salas, Sierra Stamen, and Tanya Garcia. Producing this series has involved an enormous amount of work. I think they all know that. And this team has carried out that work expertly. I'm really appreciative of all of their efforts, and just a very big thank you to all of you for making this a smooth and successful effort. A big thank you also goes out to WGBH for providing captioning support, which is a key element of making these materials accessible. I'll close out with some words from one of our panelists. In the October 5th webinar, Jana Gagnon of the Blue Lake Rancheria tribe said, and I quote, "Each nation and every stakeholder will need to contribute to climate solutions in ways they haven't before," close quote. So here on the North Coast, I want to say, let's find ways to make our contributions while also making sure that we do right by each other and by the natural world that we live in. Thank you all, and a very good evening.